We have spent a lot of time talking about the Army-Navy game, and it gives us great pleasure to introduce someone I was introduced to about a year ago after he wrote a book. He is the retired Major General Vincent Boles. His book was 4321 Leadership. And General, what a pleasure to have you on, especially on the eve of the Army-Navy game. Good afternoon, sir. How are you?
Paul, always a pleasure. Just great to be on your show, and I take great pleasure from watching your work.
Thank you. That means a great deal. I want to talk about a number of things. Let's start with the importance of this game. I know as an Army man and obviously a retired general, being one of the top officers in the service, describe to this audience, I mean, I don't want to over-exaggerate. There are more important things going on in the world, but how important was this game to you and your colleagues?
It was one of those things, I would call it a unifying moment. Wherever you were in the Army, wherever you were in the world, you knew on that Saturday in December, your service, Army, was on the line playing Navy. And likewise, I'm sure for the Navy and my Navy teammates I served with, it was a big deal for them. We'd be friends 364 days out of the year, but on the 365th day, it was a unifying thing for an entire service, and therefore it's why many of the nations, many of the folks, as you know, in the Southeast, will turn to Auburn, Alabama, and that will be the hue and cry, or they'll turn up in the North to Ohio, Michigan. But Army-Navy is one of those transcendent moments, unifying moments when the nation turns and looks.
Now, I know as a retired general, you would deal with some of the most highest security clearances in the country, if not the world. But any side bets with your fellow officers from the Navy side?
How much money you got, Paul?
I've heard these stories.
This is going to be a magical year. You have, for the first time in since 1960-61, if I have it right, both teams have winning records, and they are both going to postseason games and bowl games. So it's kind of a big deal. Army has in both games, both teams are coached by Paul Johnson, apostles of his from his days at Navy, Munkin and Ken Niumatalolo. So it's going to be quite interesting to see how it all comes together. But I would keep my powder dry in terms of a bet.
Okay.
The only bet we want to win is we want to sing second.
I understand. Well, General, let me go back a little bit to your book, 4321 Leadership, and certainly it's available out there. But I do want to get your thoughts on that and your experiences and how you came up with this concept.
Well, I had redeployed back from Iraq in 2003, 2004, and the Army in 2004 sent me from my deployment to the training base. Because we had really come to the realization that training was going to be training kids. This wasn't going to be a fast where we're going to training kids for a fight. And many of the young men and women we were put through the training base had to go to this new kind of a conflict, this counterinsurgency fight. So they took many of us officers who had been in combat and put us in the training base to get them ready for that. And I thought, and I was the chief of what was called the Ordnance Corps, a very technical branch, ammunition, maintenance, logistics, bomb disposal. And I thought that I would spend all my time on getting them technically ready. I found technically ready wasn't the issue. The issues they wanted to talk about were leadership issues. How do I connect with my team? How do I keep my team connected under pressure of combat? How do I do that? And I talked to every class that came through. We had about 20,000 students a year. And I came up with the 4321, and I talked about the 4 expectations folks have of leaders. Establish structure, manage relationships, balance risk, and make decisions. I talked about the 3 critical questions every leader has to ask before they send people out to do something. You got to look yourself in the mirror and ask, what is the standard I want them to work it to? What is the system they have to do it with? And have I correctly identified who's in charge? And then the two I talk about are the 2 reasons for stress in organizations, and only 2 reasons for stress. And then the one critical thing I talk about is how do you manage that critical factor, which is the trust equation? How do you get people to forget about their own self-interest and trust you and your vision and what you want them to do? And I came up with that, and I began talking to students about that. It got pretty good reviews, and then a video of me doing a presentation got to the Washington Speakers Bureau in Alexandria, Virginia. And the next thing I know, I was getting ready to retire, and they gave me a call and said, would you go out to Laguna Beach, California, and speak to an audience about leading in a crisis? And I said, well, I think I can do that. And one thing's led to another, and between being on the lecture circuit doing that, being a teacher and executive coach, and now the book, it's been quite a nice existence, but it is not the one I expected when I retired out of the Army. It was not what I planned.
Well, I want to ask you to relate this because I've had some discussions with you off the air about what you have learned, obviously, in your many, many years of leadership in the service to what we talk about so often here, and that's college football and coaching and how those two are related and the two intersect.
I think the biggest relation is unlike in college, for the young men and women that go off, those national treasures that go off in the dirt and the dark for us, they don't get to pick their missions. They get no vote in picking their missions. The only vote they get is how they get themselves ready to execute that mission. And that's the big deal that they do. I knew every soldier I was training, there was highly likely they would go into combat. And we would worry about, did we have them ready? Did we do every single possible thing we could do to have them ready? A football is a game. It's a competition. It's a game. I think probably the biggest thing to highlight in tomorrow's event and game is, remember, the individuals who are playing on the field tomorrow did not go to Army or Navy or Air Force to be football players. They went there to be officers in your Army, your Navy, and your Air Force. They are playing as a result of being, pretty good at it and wanting to do something. And each of the academies has a requirement that you participate in a sport of some kind. So they like to play football and they're good at it. But they didn't decide, well, I'm a great football player. I'm going to Army. I'm going to Annapolis. I'm going to Colorado Springs. They said, I want to serve my nation. And I think that's the biggest difference there, if that's helpful.
I also wanted to ask you about coaching because coaching is I'm not trying to equate what a coach does to what an officer does in any of the services, but it is such a perhaps misunderstood role, and there's so much controversy about it, and it's often very difficult to find the right person. Your thoughts on coaching and what makes a coach successful?
And obviously, we thought about that. There's a couple of things. First, a coach has to be to be a coach. You have to do two things. First, you have to have competence in your craft, and if you're in the service, you have to have competence in your craft. You have to know your business because they're going to turn to you when you tell them to do something. They want to know that you know what you're talking about. At the same time, you have to have a relationship so that you're not the leader, the commander, the coach. They want you to be their leader, their commander, their coach. They want to run into you and they want to say, that's my commander, that's my coach. I feel a connection. And to do that, you have to understand the difference between management and leadership. Management is a task list and a clipboard. It's stuff you got to do. It's directive. You tell people to do things. Leadership is connective. How do you connect with folks so that they want to stay an extra 20 minutes and do up-downs on their own? They want to run those sprints. They want to run 24 toss-power trap until they get it right exactly. They will stay and work on a project in the Pentagon because they heard my boss talking to me about it. They'll volunteer for that next mission. They're not going to do that because you manage them to do that. They're going to do that because you lead them to do that, and you form that connection. And great coaches or commanders or leaders understand it's that combination of competence and relationships that really becomes key.
As we close, it may be worth noting Mike Krzyzewski, arguably the greatest basketball coach since John Wooden and one of the greatest coaches ever, the fact that he not only coached but had such a strong connection to West Point.
Very much so. Played for Bobby Knight. And then was an assistant for Bobby Knight for a while, and then stayed at the academy and coached, and then from there went to Duke. And even there, it still came through. I still remember Krzyzewski's one of the most recent books Feinstein wrote about Valvano, Dean Smith, and Mike Krzyzewski. He talked about the fact that Duke was playing Navy, and Krzyzewski walked into the locker room, and before the game, rather than have a long dissertation about what they were going to do, he just looked at every player with his West Point ring on, and he said, I don't lose to Navy. You're not going to lose to Navy. If you're going to lose to Navy, don't come home. And then, the rest was history. Duke said, well, we don't know how we're going to. And that was when Navy had David Robinson and a couple of pretty daunting people. It was pretty early in his tenure.
an amazing story. General, we've wanted to do this for a long time. Look forward to the game tomorrow. Look forward to having you back. Best wishes, and thank you so much for making the time.
Paul, thanks so very much. Just make sure people understand those young men and women go for us. They believe we're worth it. And tomorrow's a great day to dedicate ourselves to being the type of citizens worthy of their sacrifice. They just want us to be the type of citizens they can be proud of. And thanks so very much for the opportunity, and God love you and take care.